Welcome back to The Life with the Browns. For years, viewers believed they were watching an unfiltered look into a complicated but loving polygamist family. What we didn't see was what life really looked like behind the cameras, because the moment filming began, the Browns were lifted out of poverty and into a completely different reality. And now, the truth about what that cost the children is finally coming to light. Kody Brown is officially in hot water again, but this time, the accusations aren't coming from an ex-wife or a disgruntled former partner. They're coming from his own daughter. Kody Brown, now in her early 20s, has dropped what may be one of the most explosive revelations in the history of sister wives. In a recent interview with Teen Vogue, Kody made a claim that stopped fans cold. After years of filming one of TLC's biggest reality shows, she was never paid. No contract.
No paycheck.
No trust fund. No savings account waiting for her adulthood. Just cameras in her face and her childhood turned into content. Let that sink in. According to Kody, TLC paid the parents. The adults received the checks. And then, what happened to that money was left entirely in their hands. As Kody bluntly put it, we weren't paid. Not accidentally. Not temporarily.
Systematically.
This wasn't some paperwork oversight. This was how the system worked. While viewers watched the Brown kids grow up, go to prom, cry on couches, navigate heartbreak, and struggle through family fractures, those moments were being broadcast to millions. The kids were the emotional backbone of sister wives. And yet, behind the scenes, they were treated like unpaid extras in their own lives. Kody even shared how surreal it was growing up on camera. At school, when classmates asked about the show, she'd explain that they weren't compensated. The film crew became so constant in their lives that the kids viewed them like extended family, our new uncles, as she described it. That's how normalized the surveillance became. Meanwhile, Kody was cashing the checks. It's impossible not to see this as exploitation, especially when you consider how little agency those kids had. They didn't sign contracts. They didn't negotiate pay. They didn't get a choice. The show may have lifted the family out of poverty, but Kody says it left her feeling watched, silenced, and used. And her words don't just implicate one moment or one season. They cast a shadow over the entire series. Because if Kody wasn't paid, who else wasn't? What about the rest of the kids? What about the confessional interviews? The emotional heart-to-hearts? The explosive fights? The tears that became cliffhangers? Were those moments handed over for free while the adults benefited financially? This isn't just a Brown family scandal anymore. This is a full-blown reality TV reckoning. And here's where things get even more interesting. If you've been watching the most recent seasons of Sister Wives, you may have noticed something strange. Where are the kids? Not the toddlers. Not the younger ones still living under Kody's roof. We're talking about the older children, the ones who used to be front and center. The ones who sat in those confessional chairs and spoke openly about their father, their mothers, and the slow unraveling of the family. They're gone. No more Logan. No more Hunter. No more Aspen. Even Gwendolyn, once known for her sharp wit and raw honesty, has disappeared from the talking heads. Michael D. pops in occasionally. Maddie appears here and there. But the rest? Nearly invisible. Kody has acknowledged that while the kids weren't paid directly, at some point her mom began compensating her personally. And yes, she admits they all benefited from a higher standard of living once the show took off. But that doesn't erase the bigger issue. The labor, the exposure, and the emotional cost were never fairly acknowledged. What Kody just revealed may finally explain why so many of the Brown kids have stepped away from the spotlight. Why they've gone quiet. Why the heart of sister wives now feels hollow. Because when the kids stopped participating, the truth may have already been too heavy to keep filming. And now that the receipts are out, the questions fans are asking may be impossible to ignore. And yes, Gabriel has spoken publicly about the devastating loss of his brother, Garrison. Savannah has shown up, too, in brief, quiet moments that feel heavy with grief. But compared to the earlier seasons, the change is impossible to ignore. The once loud, vibrant, emotionally present group of Brown children has largely gone silent. And let's be honest, this doesn't feel accidental. Fans aren't buying the explanation that this is just about growing up, moving out, or wanting privacy. There's a pattern here, a very clear one. And the more people look at it, the more intentional it begins to feel. Because when you actually pay attention to who is still getting full scenes, full storylines, full emotional arcs, it's almost exclusively Kody and Robin's kids. Aurora, Brianna, Solomon, Ariella. The dynamic has shifted hard, and it's shifted toward the one household still firmly under Kody's control. The camera follows where the power sits. And with that shift comes an uglier, more uncomfortable question that fans are no longer afraid to ask out loud. Is airtime connected to loyalty? Or is it something even more basic, something even colder?
Money.
Now that Gwendolyn has confirmed there was no direct pay for the year she filmed, fans are starting to connect the dots. If TLC pays the parents and the parents decide how or if that money gets distributed, then participation becomes optional. Not just emotionally optional, but financially pointless. Why would any of the older kids opt in when there's nothing in it for them except public scrutiny, emotional exposure, and lifelong digital footprints they don't control? Especially when they don't even have authority over how their names are used. Even when they're not on screen, their lives still get pulled into the narrative. Breakups, family tensions, private disagreements, rumors. Anything that serves the storyline is fair game, whether they consent or not. So maybe this isn't about the kids being too busy. Maybe it's not about disinterest or rebellion. Maybe they've simply realized what Gwen is now saying out loud. Being on Sister Wives doesn't benefit them. It benefits Kody. It benefits TLC. The kids, they're collateral. And that brings us to the money, because at the center of this entire scandal is a financial setup that isn't just questionable. It's infuriating. According to Gwendolyn, the children on Sister Wives were never paid by TLC. Not even a symbolic day rate. Not even a token appearance fee.
Why?
Because they didn't have contracts. The contracts were with the parents. Let that fully register. TLC allegedly handed over complete control to Kody and the moms. Whether the kids were compensated at all, that decision stayed inside the family. And if Gwen's account is accurate, Kody Brown didn't hesitate to exploit that loophole. She says it plainly, brutally. He didn't pay his kids. Not during filming. Not after filming. Not even when their most personal stories were used to sell entire episodes.
Think about how wild that is.
These weren't background cameos. These kids weren't extras walking through a scene. They were the emotional backbone of the entire series. Fans connected to them. Their struggles, their growth, their milestones, their heartbreaks. They made the show human. And yet, behind the scenes, while Kody was collecting checks and TLC was cashing in on ratings, the very people who made the show watchable were getting nothing. No safety net.
No savings.
No acknowledgement of their labor. And no one stepped in to stop it. Not the network. Not the adults.
Not the system that allowed it.
Now contrast that with Christine. According to Gwendolyn, her mother eventually began paying her children something. Maybe not a fortune. Maybe not a fair share of the massive revenue. But something. An acknowledgement that their time, their emotions, their presence mattered. Gwen says she received a certain amount per day, or sometimes a half day, of filming. The exact numbers are unclear, but the intent is crystal clear. Christine tried to correct what had been ignored for far too long. Did she get it perfect? Probably not. Was it late? Yes. But it sounds like she tried to make it right, especially in the later years, when the cracks in the family and the show were already impossible to hide. And that contrast matters, because it shows that this wasn't inevitable. It wasn't just how reality TV works. It was a choice that some adults made, and others finally refused to keep defending. Meanwhile, what was Kody doing through all of this? According to multiple sources, and now reinforced by Gwendolyn's own account, the answer is chillingly simple. Nothing. No contracts for the kids. No pay structure.
No transparency.
And that raises a haunting question. If Gwendolyn hadn't finally spoken up, would anyone have ever known? It almost feels like Kody was banking on silence. On the idea that his children would grow up, move on, and quietly leave their childhood behind without ever challenging the system that profited off of them. But the thing about reality television is this: the past doesn't stay buried when there are cameras involved. And now that Gwen has cracked the door open, people are starting to see the bigger picture. This wasn't just a questionable parenting decision. This looks like an entire system, one designed to protect the adults in charge while silencing the children whose lives were used as storylines, all without a single penny to show for it. Because Gwendolyn wasn't just another cast member. She grew up on this show. When Sister Wives premiered in 2010, Gwen was just 8 years old.
8.
At first, it felt magical. She's admitted she was excited to be on TV. The family had struggled financially for years, and suddenly the cameras brought more than attention. They brought stability. At the time, she saw it as a blessing. She remembers going to school and quietly bragging to classmates about being on a reality show. She and her siblings would even compete for the attention of the film crew, who they affectionately referred to as their new uncles. For a while, it felt like a game. It felt fun. It felt like they had finally made it.
But that magic didn't last.
As Gwendolyn entered puberty, everything changed, and not subtly. The same camera crew that once felt like extended family slowly began to feel like surveillance. The moments that once felt like memories became emotional minefields. She says she started to feel suffocated. Like she couldn't have a bad day without it becoming public property. Even though production didn't film inside the kids' bedrooms, the pressure of always being on slowly eroded any sense of privacy she had left. One moment still sticks with her. She remembers storming out of the house in typical teenage frustration, yelling out of sheer exhaustion, only to realize a camera was pointed directly at her. The panic hit instantly.
The shame.
The exposure. The feeling of being watched at her most vulnerable. That moment never aired. But the damage didn't disappear with the footage. In her own words, she reflected on that time with painful honesty. I wanted the attention as a kid, but now poor me. That line cuts deep, because it's not just reflection, it's a confession. Gwen is looking back at her younger self and realizing how little she understood. How many boundaries were never set. How many moments she believed belonged to her actually belonged to producers, edited and repackaged for millions of strangers. And even now, after stepping away from the show, she can't fully escape it. Her name still comes up. Her past still gets discussed. Her experiences are still pulled into storylines she no longer controls. Because when parents control the narrative, the children never truly get to walk away. And here's the part that makes this even heavier. This isn't just Gwendolyn's story. It's the story of nearly every Brown child who grew up under those lights. They didn't sign contracts. They didn't give informed consent. They didn't understand what it meant to have their childhood monetized. Now, as adults, they're left sorting through the emotional debris of a life that was partially scripted for someone else's benefit. And it wasn't just the presence of cameras that shaped Gwendolyn's childhood. It was what those cameras chose to capture. Birthdays, family vacations, school milestones. Moments most people get to experience privately were framed, lit, edited, and broadcast to millions. For a time, Gwen admits she appreciated that. She liked being able to rewatch old vacations like family home movies. It felt like a scrapbook, a way to revisit memories. But those sweet moments came at a cost. Because between the laughter and road trips were scenes of raw pain, awkward puberty, deep family dysfunction, emotional wounds preserved forever on film. And once those moments are out there, they never really belong to you again.
Divorce.
Screaming matches. Public humiliation. The kind of moments most children would never want frozen in time, let alone broadcast to millions. And even when the Brown kids tried to step back, when they stopped appearing regularly on camera, their names didn't disappear. They just shifted roles. They became talking points. Gwendolyn highlights a deeply unsettling truth. Whether the kids are physically present or not, their lives are still used as fuel for the storyline. A personal decision suddenly becomes a confessional topic. A boundary gets reframed as family drama. Cutting ties turns into a plot twist. These aren't casual mentions. they're narrative devices. And as long as the contracts remain in the parents' hands, the children's stories remain up for grabs. That's why this feels so much heavier than a paycheck dispute. This is about control. These kids weren't just unpaid participants. They were emotional laborers, expected to expose their vulnerabilities, manage adult-level conflict, and hold themselves together while the adults in their lives collected the profits. And for what? Not just fame. Not just exposure. A show that, according to Gwendolyn herself, ended up doing more harm than good. She talks about feeling stifled, watched, trapped in emotional spirals with nowhere to retreat. The kind of damage that doesn't fade with time. It settles in. It changes you. What makes all of this even more disturbing is how sister wives framed these kids publicly. The Brown children were presented as proof that plural marriage could work, that the family was stable, loving, functional, that the experiment was a success. But behind the scenes, the cracks were already there, and the kids felt them first. The show became a performance of unity, while privately, the family was unraveling. As the seasons dragged on, those performances demanded higher emotional tolls. And for most of the kids, still no compensation, no protection.
No exit ramp.
So when we ask why the children are disappearing from the show, maybe the answer isn't mysterious at all. They've had enough. Enough of being used. Enough of watching their pain turned into plot points. Enough of waiting for someone, anyone, to acknowledge what their silence really means. Because their silence isn't apathy. It's protest. Then came the loss that shook even longtime fans to their core, the heartbreaking death of Garrison Brown. It wasn't just the tragedy itself. It was how it was handled. Or more accurately, how it wasn't. If there was ever a moment to stop filming,
To pause.
to reflect, to ask whether reality television had crossed a line, that was it. But the show didn't stop. The cameras kept rolling. The storyline marched on. And that refusal to break from business as usual spoke louder than any on-screen tribute ever could. What should have been a moment of collective mourning became yet another chapter in the Brown family saga. For many viewers, that was the final straw. Garrison's passing should have forced Kody to reevaluate everything, not just his parenting, but the entire ecosystem he helped create. A system where children were turned into characters, where privacy was secondary, where vulnerability was monetized. But instead of a reckoning, there was more posturing, more episodes, more dysfunction packaged neatly for prime time. And while TLC may have tried to handle the subject delicately on screen, the real damage had already been done because the deepest wounds don't show up in edited scenes. They live off camera, in the resentment, the emotional fragmentation, the irreversible sense that this family was never truly protected. For Gwen and her siblings, Garrison's death wasn't just a devastating personal loss. It was a symbol of everything that had gone wrong. The show wasn't merely documenting their lives. In many ways, it was shaping them, twisting dynamics, accelerating conflict, and amplifying pain for the sake of content. And now, years later, the emotional cost is finally coming into focus. One by one, the kids are pulling away. The trust is broken. The illusion is shattered. And we're left asking the question no one seems to want to answer. Why didn't anyone step in sooner? Why wasn't there a moment, any moment, where someone, not Kody, not the network, not even the other adults, said this is too much? Gwendolyn's interview makes one thing painfully clear. The kids felt the weight of this long before the audience ever did. They saw the fractures forming before they became headlines. They understood what the show was doing to their family, while the rest of the world was still calling it entertaining. And they've been living with the consequences ever since. This isn't just about reality TV failing children. It's about the people closest to them, the ones who are supposed to protect them, choosing production value over peace. Cameras over care. Storylines over safety. Now, as grief settles in, as fans mourn Garrison, and as more of the kids begin to speak out, one truth is impossible to ignore. There were warning signs. And no one wanted to listen. And if you thought unpaid labor was the worst part of Gwendolyn's story, what she revealed next takes this to an entirely different level. In the Teen Vogue interview, Gwen shared something that many longtime Sister Wives viewers never fully understood. She didn't actually choose to come out on camera. Not in the way people assume. She says she was in the middle of a routine interview, talking about the divorce, or maybe her sister Isabel moving, when a producer casually dropped a bombshell question. Hey, your mom mentioned you're bi. Do you want to talk about that?
Just like that.
No warning.
No prooperasyon. No consent.
Caught completely off guard, Gwen admitted it was true. And while she hasn't forgotten that moment, she's been very clear about something else. Her sexuality was never a secret. She had already shared it online, on Twitter, on Instagram. But there's a massive difference between choosing to post something yourself and having it dissected, edited, and repackaged into a national television storyline. She wasn't hiding who she was. She just wasn't ready to hand it over to TLC for ratings. And yet, that's exactly what happened. Because her mother had mentioned it to a producer. And a producer decided that moment was too good to pass up. But somehow it gets worse. Gwendolyn has also revealed that when she eventually came out to her family, Robin, Kody's only remaining wife, was furious. Not because Gwen is queer, but because she hadn't saved the moment for the show. Read that again. Robin wasn't upset about who Gwendolyn is. She was upset that her coming out didn't happen in front of a camera. As if one of the most intimate, vulnerable moments of a young woman's life should have been reserved for a perfectly lit confessional. As if her identity was content. As if it was a missed storyline opportunity. And while Gwen has never openly attacked Christine, there's still a shadow over the moment her mom shared that detail with producers. Intentional or not, that act took something away from Gwen, her agency. Because in the world of Sister Wives, once something becomes part of the storyline, it no longer belongs to you. It belongs to the show. Gwendolyn recalls awkwardly stumbling through an explanation of bisexuality on camera, talking about being attracted to men, women, and people across gender spectrums. She cringes looking back, remembering how unprepared and flustered she felt. And honestly, who wouldn't? No one should be forced to explain their identity on demand, especially when they're still figuring it out themselves. Gwen wasn't hiding. She was surviving. And the fact that a casual comment from a parent triggered a televised moment says everything about how little control these kids truly had. Now, when the Brown parents are pressed about compensation, they often lean on the same defense. We paid for our kids' college and cars. On the surface, that sounds generous. But Gwendolyn's experience exposes how misleading that argument really is. First of all, college isn't payment. It's not income. It's not wages. It's a parental responsibility. One that countless families strive to meet without ever putting their children on reality television. And yet, Kody and others have framed it like a reward. A trade-off. As if years of unpaid emotional labor somehow earn you a used car and partial tuition. Even that narrative doesn't hold up under scrutiny. Gwendolyn has said that Christine eventually began paying the kids small amounts for filming, but she couldn't even say how much. Just that it wasn't a fair share. A few dollars per day. Maybe a half-day rate. Enough to acknowledge their time, but nowhere near equitable. Meanwhile, Kody? Radio silence. There's not a single credible report that he paid any of his kids for their years of work on the show. And when it comes to those supposed college funds, the story falls apart even faster. Because if education was truly covered, why did so many of the boys turn to the military to secure their futures? Hunter went to the Air Force Academy. Garrison joined the National Guard. Paid-on served as well. Those weren't just patriotic choices. They were strategic ones. Because for many of the Brown kids, stability didn't come from the show that documented their lives. It came from finding a way out of it. The military pays for education. And that alone should raise alarms. If these boys truly had solid college funds set aside from years on a hit television show, would they have needed to enlist? Would they have chosen years of rigid structure, service, and personal risk just to secure a degree? And if savings really existed, where did that money go? The same questions apply to the cars. Yes, some of the kids were given vehicles, but not the kind you'd expect from a family that spent over a decade as the face of a major cable franchise. We're talking about modest used cars. $2,000 or $3,000. Practical. Basic. For many families, that's generous. For children who were literal cast members on a long-running TLC hit, it's insulting. These weren't gifts. They were band-aids. And here's the part no one likes to talk about. Not all of the kids went to college. Not all of them finished. So what happened to the money that was supposedly earmarked for their futures? Did it disappear? Was it reassigned? Or did their values simply vanish when they stopped fitting the storyline? Because that's what this is starting to look like. Make good TV or be forgotten. Either way, you don't get paid. This isn't about entitled kids complaining over tuition. This is about a father who allegedly profited from his children's lives while they walked away with trauma, reruns, and unresolved pain. And if Christine was at least attempting to make things right, what does Kody's refusal to do the same say about him? What Gwendolyn shared isn't just a personal grievance. It's part of a growing chorus exposing the dark underbelly of reality television itself. Because this story doesn't start or end with sister wives. Gwen's experience mirrors what we've heard from other former child reality stars who are finally speaking out. From the Duggar children to other TLC families, the pattern is chillingly consistent. Years of filming, millions in revenue, and yet the kids saw almost none of it.
Why?
Because of a loophole. A deliberate one. They weren't considered actors. And because of that, they weren't protected by union rules, child labor laws, or trust fund requirements that exist in scripted television. In traditional film and TV, child actors are protected by the Screen Actors Guild. There are limits on work hours, requirements for schooling, and most importantly, money. A portion of every paycheck must be placed into a trust the child can access at adulthood. Reality TV bypasses all of that. Networks argue these kids aren't acting, they're just being themselves. And with that argument, every safeguard disappears.
No unions.
No work permits. No trust funds. Just parents signing contracts and children being dragged along for the ride. TLC, in particular, has faced these accusations repeatedly. From John and Kate plus 8 to 19 kids and counting, the network has been accused of building empires on the backs of unpaid children. And now, voices like Kody Brown and Jill Duggar are connecting the dots. TLC doesn't just avoid paying kids directly. They film in states with lax labor laws. Places where parental consent is enough. Where kids don't need contracts. Where oversight is minimal. That's not an accident. That's strategy.
And it works.
Viewers fall in love with the families. The drama feels authentic. The tears feel real. But behind the scenes, children are allegedly being exploited for millions, while receiving nothing in return. Even TLC's response to the Teen Vogue article said everything without saying anything at all. They claimed compensation was handled in accordance with contractual commitments and applicable laws. Translation: we paid who we were legally required to pay. No acknowledgement of the kids.
No apology.
No promise of reform. Just business as usual. And that's why Gwendolyn's decision to speak out matters so much. Because once people truly understand how many children were turned into unpaid laborers in the name of family entertainment, it becomes impossible to pretend these shows are harmless. The question now isn't just whether Kody Brown exploited his kids. It's whether an entire industry has been doing the same thing for decades, and how many stories are still waiting to surface. If there's one thing Kody Brown made clear, it's this: silence is no longer an option. She didn't hedge. She didn't sugarcoat. She told the world exactly what happened, that she and her siblings were filmed for years without pay, that their private lives were mined for content, and that their pain was treated as entertainment. In doing so, she didn't just call out her father. She exposed a system designed to blur boundaries and dodge accountability by default. What she did wasn't just brave, it was necessary. Because if the kids who grew up on these shows don't speak up now, who will? Her story forces us to re-examine everything we thought we knew about Sister Wives, about TLC, and about reality television itself. These weren't background figures. These were children with emotions, futures, and voices silenced in favor of ratings and production schedules. The fact that Gwen can still recall the sting of being ambushed by a producer, being outed on camera, watching her father refuse to compensate her, proves how deep the wounds still run. These aren't memories. They're traumas. And they're finally being named. What's even more powerful is how far her words reach beyond the Brown family. Any child raised in front of reality TV cameras, whether in a polygamist household, a strict religious family, or a messy divorce saga, has faced the same structural failure.
No contracts.
No protection. No guarantee of fairness. Yet the networks keep profiting. The parents keep filming. And the kids are left to clean up the emotional and financial aftermath. So, where does that leave Kody Brown? Publicly, he's stayed silent. But fans have already reached their conclusions. For many, this was the final nail in a very long coffin. The man who once preached family unity now looks like someone who allowed, if not enabled, his children's exploitation. And even if he believed he was doing the right thing at the time, the damage is done. Gwenlyn's story can't be unheard. The spotlight has shifted, and this time, it isn't flattering. Maybe this is the beginning of something bigger. A reckoning. A moment where former child reality stars reclaim their narratives, demand accountability, and finally take back the privacy they were never given. Or maybe it's just one voice that networks hope will fade away. Either way, Gwenlyn Brown did something extraordinary. She took a story that was never hers to control and wrestled it back. Now the question is yours to answer. Do you think the entire reality TV industry needs to change, or is this just one family's failure inside a much bigger system? Make sure to like, subscribe, and stay tuned, because the next video waiting for you might just change how you see reality television forever.